Hello everybody, hope you can hear me fine and you can see the slides. Welcome to today's Sigma-HSE webinar on a particular element of process safety management where I'll delve into culture and leadership and how important those two subjects are if we want to do process safety well. Just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Andy Fowler, chemist by training, experience over the past 40+ years in this subject of process safety, whether that's been working in the chemical manufacturing industry or as a regulator. I used to work for the Health and Safety Executive as a process safety specialist, or for the past 15+ years in consultancy. So I should know a little bit by now. And it's fair to say, I think, that over the past 15 years, I've done a lot on this topic in that I have provided training to in excess of 300 boards of directors and senior leaders within the process industries. So I've learned over that time how senior executives work and how they think and some of the practices that they get up to, which hopefully I will share with you throughout today. But before we start properly, I'd just like to give you a flavour of Sigma-HSE. We're a global process safety management consultancy with technical offices in India, in the USA, and headquartered in Winchester. But we also have the luxury of process safety laboratories both at Winchester and in India, where we can really pull apart materials and get a good understanding of the hazards and risks involved in handling these materials. So as you'd expect, as a consultancy, we can cope with most things. We've got the testing laboratories and we undertake a lot of training, primarily bespoke training now, specifically aimed at how you operate your processes and so on and so forth. So as you'd expect, as a process safety management consultancy, we can tackle all of the elements of process safety that I'll take you through in a short while. But we do a lot of work on DESIR, ATEX, assist explosion protected equipment and assessments associated with that. Everything associated with process safety, whether that's doing consequence analysis, frequency analysis, hazards, HAZOPs, bow ties, as well as chemical reaction hazard control and management and everything else. We've got the labs where we can test for fire and explosion properties of gas vapors and powders, and electrostatic properties. We've got calorimeters to really get to grips with understanding how chemical reactions behave during scale up and so on and so forth. But today where we're dealing with process safety management and the cultural and leadership elements of this subject, I want to really give you some things to think about to see how well you're doing within your own business. And my primary focus will be giving a bit of understanding and how leadership is so important and culture aspects, which really comes down to people's behaviours and attitudes. Because really, when you think about it, process safety management is trying to prevent catastrophes. It's trying to prevent and deal with fires, explosions, toxic gas releases, incidents that have the potential to cause a lot of harm. And throughout history, you'll no doubt be aware of some of the large major incidents that have occurred, some of which have resulted in an awful lot of injuries and deaths, like Bhopal, for instance, in the 80s, with the release of methyl isocyanate, the highly toxic gas. Large fires and explosions like Flixborough and Buncefield in the UK, and these sorts of things. It's the sort of events that can harm businesses. If you have one of these major events you get yourself on the news and pretty sharply these days with social media. You get that global coverage extremely quickly. So they're excellent platforms for getting information about yourselves out to potential clients and customers. But also, if you do things and have mishaps, you'll get the bad side of that as well. So there's a large part of reputational loss and impacts on the business, okay, that we need to try and cope with. So let's just look and get straight in our minds just what process safety management is. And I can boil it down into being able as a company to answer these three questions in detail, in a full understanding. Do we understand what can go wrong? Do we know what hazards can occur on our plant? Do we know how big those hazards are? Do we know what the impact of those hazards may be? And to put it crudely, when we're doing these analyses and so on, it's how many people are we going to kill or injure? How much of the environment are we going to significantly harm? Or indeed, how much of the business are we going to harm? And then the second question, what have we got in the business to prevent these bad things from going wrong? And then how do we know that these measures, the things that we do, are effective? I mean, of course, we're in risk land, so we can do our best. We can still be very unlucky, and events could happen. That's just life. But what we're trying to do in process safety management is not win the lotto jackpot. If you think about the lotto jackpot in the UK, we can become multimillionaires overnight. So the consequences of winning that jackpot are very severe. Large pots of money, changing in life, all the good things that we can do because we've got those consequences. The likelihood of winning that jackpot, very slim indeed. In fact, before they changed the rules on the UK lottery, about 10 years ago, the risks of winning the lottery jackpot was 1 in 14 million. And you think, oh, well, that's pretty low, but what's that mean in practice? How does that equate to normal life? Well, let me put it this way. If you're a man over 40 and you buy your lotto ticket at noon on Saturday, then you're actually more likely to have died from a heart attack by the time the draw is pulled at 8 p.m. on a Saturday evening than you are of winning that jackpot. So it's very, very unlikely. And this is one of the major problems with process safety management and doing it well, is we're dealing with events that are extremely low likelihood. For example, in the UK, if you've got major accident hazards present on your site, you will have to produce what's known as a coma safety report that's put in front of the regulators. And you will demonstrate to the authorities that the risks of those major accident hazards occurring is, well, it's not allowed to be greater than 1 in 10,000 per year. And they're likely to be 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million year events. They're very low frequency. In fact, most of us can do our 40 years in the industry and not come across a major accident hazard at all. That's just the fact of life. But you can see how it's difficult to put a lot of effort in to prevent these things from happening and keep it at the forefront of your mind than it is for the worries that we have, our day-to-day worries and tasks and schedules and deadlines that we have to cope with. But we're required to do so by the regulator and by society. So just let's have a look at quickly what the answers to these three questions. The first one, do we understand what can go wrong? Well, this is making sure that we have robust and proportionate hazard identification studies and risk assessments done, where we can get a really good understanding of all the causes, initiating causes of the incidents that we could have, and we know how big the fires, explosions and so on could be. Okay, we really need that understanding because that will then prioritize, then if you like, where we put our efforts. The second question, of course, is once we've answered the first question, we then put in place things on our process plant, bits of equipment and so on, or special things that we do that prevent, control and mitigate these potential large hazards. And of course, these measures, these risk reduction measures, safeguards, barriers, call them what you wish, they reduce the likelihood of the harmful event. Some of them can prevent it, most of them reduce the likelihood of it happening. Okay, and then along with those special pieces of equipment known as safety critical equipment and safety critical tasks in the jargon of process safety, they're important things. They're equipment that ideally should never have to operate. They're there to prevent the really big events from occurring, and therefore they shouldn't be operating very regularly at all, if at all. But when they are called upon to work, we need to know that they will be effective. And that's what a lot of the management systems implemented across your businesses are trying to ensure, that those pieces of equipment have been or your tasks have been properly designed, properly constructed, properly installed, are properly operated, properly inspected and maintained. And all of these steps is what's known as the process safety life cycle. Yeah, and these are the things that, this is why we maintain things, inspect things, and so on and so forth, and design them properly, because they've got a job to do. We need to understand from answering the first question what the job is that they've got to do, and then we've got to make sure that on the very odd occasion that they're asked to work, they will in fact work. It's not gummed up and not being maintained so the valve won't open or won't close or whatever. And then we've got the third question: how do we know that those things are likely to be effective? It's our learning. Yeah, it's our performance metrics, our process safety performance indicators, where we monitor the performance of these pieces of equipment, how we investigate incidents and near misses to get the learnings, what we get from our audits, you know. And when, I mean, I've done a lot of training on these leadership of process safety management, and at every training course I do, I've asked the financial director, how much do you spend on auditing a year? How much do you spend on incident investigation a year? And I've never yet been given a numerical value. I've always got a blank look. But clearly it's a big figure. Clearly it's a very big figure. And, you know, it blends into the culture, because, you know, think yourselves, what happens on your process, on your plant, when you know that an auditor is coming round next week? It's very much like when our king goes to visit somewhere. Often what he smells is freshly painted equipment and so on, because we've made it look nice and we've tidied it up before somebody important comes to visit. Yeah, but when you think about it, the auditor's got a very key role. What they're trying to do is not show to you that everything's hunky-dory. They're trying to find the gaps. They're trying to find the improvements necessary where you can reduce that risk. And when you think about it, what is common practice, you know, we hide things. We hope the auditor won't unearth certain problems. On the whole, people who work in the process industries fully understand the state of their equipment and fully understand which of their management systems are implemented well and those that aren't implemented so well. But as humans, we tend not to fix them, but hide them and keep our fingers crossed. But it's very important that we get to grips with these things to be able to manage them accordingly. Two critical points just worth doing. You know, process safety is an extremely large subject, and yes, in many aspects of it, parts of it are extremely technical. You know, doing the risk assessments, designing the equipment and so on and so forth. But a lot of it is management skill. And both aspects require human involvement and competence to do well. Okay? But the leadership is there to give us that commitment to do the right thing. And that commitment is set by the leadership. Whether we like it or not, innately we are still pack animals. We look up to a leader. We try to satisfy our leaders. Okay? We try to give them what they want. But they've got to tell us what they want. They've got to set that standard. They've got to tell us what is the right thing. Yeah, because what we're talking about here, when we look at our measures that we've got installed, as I say, on the odd time they're called to work, we need them to be fully effective, to do what they should do. Because a lot of these measures will kill the potential major accident. They'll prevent it completely, but only if they work. A lot of effort to do that. Yeah, but we've got to have the resources and everything else to do it. We've got to do the things properly. When we're dealing with safety critical things, whether that's business criticality, safety criticality, even quality criticality, we need certain things doing in the correct way. And again, this is difficult because leaders for many years, and continually so, strive on giving employees initiative. And really, we don't want initiative when we're dealing with these things. We want the job doing the way it's been planned to do on the back of our knowledge of what it has to do. We need to make sure that it's effective. So hopefully I'm giving you a flavour here of the sorts of things that where leaders need to be involved, and I'll go into it a bit more detail. There are some frameworks out there that tell you all the various elements of process safety, all the things that you need to tackle. One is the CCPS guidelines published by the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. Excellent book in my opinion, and it consists of 4 pillars with 20 elements. And within the UK, we have the UK Energy Institute guidelines, which are 4 focus areas and 18 elements. They've combined a couple of them, but effectively they are the same. And if we just look at some of these elements, when we look at the various pillars, the first pillar within the CCPS guidelines is the pillar around leadership and culture. This culture to do the right thing. Leadership that makes things happen, leadership that monitors what's going on, organizational competence of the business to do the right thing, to manage these potential major accident hazards, to make sure that we don't have them and hence there's no impact on our stakeholders, whether that's the regulator, whether that's us shareholders, whether that's society as a whole. Nobody wants to have these major incidents. So there's a whole pillar associated with process safety guidelines, just showing how without leadership, things don't change. Directions not set, standards aren't set as the way in which you operate your business and what you're trying to achieve. The second pillar is around really understanding. It's really associated with that first question of do we understand what can go wrong on our sites? It's around hazard identification and risk assessment and keeping that information within the business. And we've all been in there when we've ended up letting people who know a lot leave the business, and all of a sudden that knowledge has gone. It's no longer in the business. It was retained within a couple of individuals because corporately we've not captured that really important knowledge or understanding. The third pillar is around managing risk, and this is where, you know, even when you're talking about occupational safety, it's the same sort of headings that we have here, that we operate things correctly, we look after them, we maintain and inspect them, and so on and so forth, make sure people are competent. Same headings in any old health and safety management system. You can buy those off the shelf from places like British Standards Organisation and so forth. Okay, you'll see the same headings. Within process safety, we have to go a step above. But we've seen that if we've had that leadership, if we've had that commitment, it can work. We've seen this in occupational safety. We have seen with leadership that now it's very unlikely that you'll go on your site and you'll find somebody not wearing the correct PPE, for instance. Yeah, and that's because we put that effort in to make it happen. Yeah, and we've seen that evidence. We've seen lost time injury statistics fall and bobble along at quite a low level. They never used to be there when I was a lad, but we've got down there because we put the effort in. We've set the standards. Okay. Of course, that's what we're trying to do with process safety. The thing that stops us, of course, is we take our foot off the accelerator with the subject because we keep our fingers crossed that with realization that these events that we're trying to prevent are extremely low likelihood, very rare to happen. And then the fourth pillar is around the learning. That third question again. You know, how do we get information about the performance of our processes? And process safety performance measurement indicators and metrics, a supposedly new thing applied to the good old accepted good management practice. It's just involving management principles into the management of safety, really. These days it's plan, do, check, act, and we have metrics to measure performance. But again, it's humans. I know lots of businesses who put a lot of effort into determining what process safety indicators they're going to measure. Okay, and I know that many of you will prepare such indicators to give to the board meetings every month or every quarter. But in my experience, there's an awful lot of work goes into that, and indicators can be sent up to senior leadership levels which are not very good. They're in the red because they're often traffic light systems, red, amber and green. And you know, on many instances, staff get frustrated because although they're presenting indicators that are not looking good, they get extremely low levels of feedback from the board about, well, what's happening about? And they see these red indicators time and time again, but still don't ask questions. Yeah, so it sort of questions their commitment to doing this job properly. And of course, you've got to be clever because as humans, we play with performance measurements as well. We had a case in, well, it must be about 20 years ago now, when we had the Blair government in the UK, where there was an issue. People were turning up to hospitals, emergency facilities, and having to wait an awful long time before they got seen by a paramedic or doctor. And they applied good management practices and developed performance indicators, real-time performance indicators, screens up, which were turning red if people were waiting too long. And after a while, the indicators, with a lot of work that went on, indicators started to go green. But it took one senior manager to think, well, wait a minute, all right, the indicators are looking green, but have we actually asked the customers, the clients, the people who are turning up at emergency, if they're happy? And when that person went out and just quickly surveyed people who were around in emergency rooms, found out that, well, I don't care what the indicators are showing, people aren't being seen. And what was happening was the staff in some of the hospitals were moving people who'd been there more than 2 hours into different rooms, and those rooms didn't count within the statistics. So they sidelined it, but they didn't fix the problem. So you've got to be very clever with how you fix your performance indicators. Another metric that is very often used following training of senior leaders in process safety leadership is they decide that they need to go out and visibly show to the workforce how they're committed to process safety. So they tend to put themselves on visits to the facilities to talk about process safety. And they set an indicator to make sure that that happens. And the indicator definitely shows that the leaders have been to site. There's no measurement, there's no assurance that what they talked about when they got on site was indeed process safety. They might have spent their whole time talking about the football championship for all we know. That wasn't measured. We just measured that they actually went to site, supposedly to talk about process safety. So yes, there's a lot of policies and procedures associated with process safety. I often view process safety as a bag of spaghetti because all of these various elements need to be dealt with. And, you know, we often get into silo mentality because certain of these policies and procedures belong to certain disciplines or certain individuals within organizations, but it needs to be wider than that. It needs to be an holistic system. Getting the pieces of paper and developing those is the easy part. As I've said, the frameworks are there to help you. It's making sure that those policies and procedures are understood and actually used and implemented well. So they need to be workable. We see lots of instances in industries where the policies aren't pursued because the time frames that are required are too long, so they get side-footed. The problem with a lot of things associated with process safety is you don't get a quick answer. You know, those of you who have been involved in undertaking HAZOPs, for example, to gain that understanding, know how long it takes to do that job. Those of you who are involved in putting out permits to work each day at the start of the day for contractors to do maintenance work will realise, can you really do what the procedure says you should do? Because you haven't got all the time to be able to do as the procedure says. So there's all of these elements that we need to get working well. But leadership is important. Leadership gives us the way, because leadership is the one thing, if they're involved in it and if they've got some level of competence in it and if they've got that visibility and promotion of it, to change the way that people think and act at work, to give us that positive culture. And if you remember back to the Texas City event and the Baker panel findings, one of the major issues from there was there wasn't any clear and positive process safety leadership. It was a case of information going up to the leadership, no action, no action being taken on it. And some of those things, when you read the evidence, some of those audits were very clear on what the auditor thought about the practices and what is likely to happen on those sites. So it is key that these leaders understand and take action. So let's just have a look at what leadership is, or supposed to be. It's supposed to set, it's really around sustainability of the business. It sets the roadmap for a significant period of time of what this business needs to achieve. And really, to be sustainable, it needs to be focused on value maximisation rather than profit maximisation. Because doing process safety is not a cheap thing to do. To do it well, it requires an awful lot of resources. The value is that the business keeps going and isn't stopped because it has these major accident hazards. But it can really influence the performance by setting this strategic vision. Okay, and this is why the leaders need to get out and convince you as members of staff that it's important to them. Because if it's not important to them, really speaking, it's not going to be important to you. Yeah? If the only time you see a director, all they talk about is plant throughput or plant costs, you know what's important to them. And you bend over backwards to get that throughput up and to cut those costs. And we've seen it in practice throughout history. Plants operated without with the safety critical equipment turned off to allow them to give that greater throughput and so on and so forth. We've seen it all. And this is different to management, site management, which are more focused to yearly tactical goals, what's required for that year. So leaders have this longer view, and they need to convince us that process safety is important to us. If it becomes important to us, then we'll start to get this thing called process safety culture. And this is just a definition here of that the UK Health and Safety Executive defined safety culture, the product of the individual and group values, attitudes, competencies, and patterns of behaviour that determine the commitment to and the style and proficiency of an organisation's health and safety programmes. It's a bureaucratic organisation, so you expect a bureaucratic system, a definition. Yeah, I like the one, it's how the organisation behaves when no one's watching. Remember, it's about doing the right job when it needs to be done properly. Yeah, it's about when you've got a person who's got to get out of bed, turn up on site in some remote location to try and fix something. And when they get to the site of the equipment, they suddenly realise that they don't have the correct tool to do the job. You know, what happens in practice? It's likely that they'll do the job without the right tool. What we want is the culture where that person walks back to his van and gets the right tool and uses a tool because they understand what can happen if it's not done right, that the job has got to be done right each and every time. Okay, so this is culture. This is changing the way in which we think and act. And often, you know, you can look at culture and say, well, what's culture really? Well, really, it's about people's attitudes. Everybody in the business, their attitude to safety or to process safety. So, you know, I mean, I'm a consultant, so companies can come to me and ask about, can we improve our process safety culture? And I go, well, it's a bit of an esoteric subject, really, how to change culture. It's a bit difficult because it depends on people's attitude. So I can't really give you an action list on how to create culture because it's based upon people's attitudes. Well, okay, then you're the consultant. Give us an action plan to look at the attitudes of people. And I think, well, I don't really know how to do that either. It is what it is, in a sense, because attitudes are based on people's behaviours. And we're getting very personal now. So then if you really want me to do that, I need to interview every member of staff on the site and see how they behave somehow. And you don't want to do that because it'll cost far too much to do. But it's these changes in behaviour, these attitudes that need to change to give us the correct culture to do the right thing at the right time. But those are outcomes. The way people behave, their attitudes, the culture is an outcome. The inputs to driving that culture, to driving those behaviours and attitudes, are the three things on the left. It's having the good systems and procedures, the management system, making sure that the policies and procedures are present and they're workable and people follow them and they understand why they have to follow them, and they're able to follow them in real life and do it properly. It's around having sound targets and objectives, things that are achievable within the timescales and the resources that we've got to give to this subject. The main thing required to change culture is coaching and mentoring. By essentially, basically, you really need everybody in the business to undertake coaching and mentoring. Okay, and again, this needs to be done in a positive way. We work better if we're given positivity to change the way of our attitudes or our behaviour rather than negatively. And very often when companies embark on the process safety journey and try to get to the cultural aspects, they'll do a lot of watching people do jobs and talking to people about the jobs. But in practice, that is often it's a negative thing. People go out to find someone who they can clearly see isn't doing the job properly. And then they'll go off and they'll have a discussion about why they're not doing the job properly. Instead of really focusing on understanding when you see somebody doing the job well and correctly, getting in there, engaging their understanding. Do they know why they're being asked to do it this way? Do they know the consequences of getting it wrong? Do they know why it's so important to do this properly? So it's coaching and mentoring in a very positive way. And so, of course, this is a mammoth job. So to help us prioritize that, we need to basically look at where we know there are weaknesses. Yeah, it's really all about changing the way we talk about safety. When I go into organizations that have really good occupational safety cultures, it's quite obvious because just passing people talking, they're talking about safety. It's intrinsic to the way they operate. It's always in the forefront of their minds. Okay? That's because we put the time and effort in and we do all the near miss reporting and everything else. It's not necessarily there for process safety. I've been around sites where I've been visiting sites and, people are very keen on holding the handrail when we go up and down steps. And being the person I am, I always try it out. Invariably, I'll walk up and down the steps without holding the handrail. And on 99 times out of 100, somebody will tell me, would you mind please holding the handrail? And then I do as I'm told. And there's not a problem. I've just tested it. Yeah, it's there. But then I can go on site. I can see holes in buns. I can see rubbish inside flammable liquid tank buns and things like this. And I'm looking at it. Was there a problem? They don't recognise it. So we really need to occasionally take off the occupational safety glasses and put our process safety glasses on and look for the things that are critical. How do I know that that piece of equipment there, if it's going to call upon to work, is going to work? Where's my evidence for that? And it's the same trick an auditor can use. Ideally, auditing should be done by the auditor getting hold of a potential major accident hazard that's been identified on the site, pulling out what equipment is installed and what tasks are present within the task to do the job properly, and then going to look for the evidence that the operator knows how to operate them and when to operate the piece of equipment, and what it will do and what it won't do, and that it's been designed according to the proper standard, and it looks as if it's maintained, and there's evidence when you talk to the engineering manager that maintenance is occurring on it. I've been on sites before where a particular valve has been indicated as safety critical on a bow tie, and when I've asked the operator, how do you operate that valve, I then sit back for 15 minutes when they decide, try and find out where the hell is the valve. And when we've suddenly found that it's out in the field and it's surrounded by knee-high grass and you can't really see it, and when I get to it and look at it, it looks corroded. And I've said, well, that's not exactly going to be maintained, does it? It doesn't look as if it's been maintained. And then when you follow through and you see that, yes, it's not been maintained because it's been forgotten about. But we've decided when we've answered that first question, do we understand what can go wrong? And the second question, what have we got? We've decided that's a bit of safety critical plant, but somehow we've forgotten about it. So it's really around this, having that competence, having that engagement, having that two-way conversation between leaders, between senior managers and the operating staff and the maintaining staff, and listening to their issues and making changes accordingly. That's what culture's about. It's all around trying to do the right thing. It's an awful lot of work, but as I say, somewhere in your business, somebody, consciously or subconsciously, all the risks associated with your processes will be understood. They'll know which elements of your process safety management system don't work well, which ones are so slow that they're always sidelined because you want to be lean and mean and do, satisfy the clients quickly and efficiently and so on. Yeah, they're there, put something through the management of change system in process safety, you don't get a quick answer. Start doing some of those assessments that you have to do, you don't get quick answers. Doing the inspection means shutting the production plant down for a significant amount of time to be able to do it properly. Okay, and you all know how difficult it is sometimes to get the plant off production to be able to do these sorts of things, but it's critical that we do it. So we need to look at this in a holistic fashion. We need to get out of our silos and we need to understand the breadth of it, and the leaders do as well. It's complex, it's wide-ranging, but it is all linked. It is all linked. We can take that bag of spaghetti and make it meaningful. The thing that makes it work is proactivity, being a proactive company, looking for the hazards and risks, putting in place the measures to prevent, control and mitigate them, not just waiting till it breaks down and then fixing it, not just making the improvements once we've had an incident, we've done an investigation and we've found that things were failing. Yeah, we've got to get at these gaps. We really do have to get at these gaps. So every opportunity of getting people to put those process safety spectacles on when they go around looking at their processes. But as I say, you can prioritise it because you'll have talk to your people, they'll tell you which parts of the management system, which parts of the job, which parts of the operational maintenance practices are very difficult for them to do, and especially do what the procedures are calling for. Okay. So just to finish on, I'll introduce something called high reliability organisations, and this is aimed at businesses which are innately risky, as process industries with significant major accident hazards are. Okay, and this is, this isn't something that you get a badge of honour or a badge you can stick on the front of the building that say you've got some award for doing this. This is a way of thinking. So it's around really having that definition, that full definition of what it is you're trying to achieve and what measures you've got built into your designs to give you the desired performance that you require. Okay, it's about being proactive. If you're proactive, then you're anticipating problems before they occur and fixing them. This should mean that any events that do happen, unexpected events, you know, rumfles, known unknowns and unknown unknowns and so on, those should be less in number and you should be able to contain them a lot more rapidly. Coupling that with a learning organisation, you take every opportunity to learn. You value an auditor coming in to look at your thing. You give the auditor the problems. You say to the auditor, we don't think this aspect is working well. Please go away and tell us how we can improve it and make it better. We'll tell you what's wrong rather than sweeping it under the carpet and waiting for the auditor to hopefully find it, but they may not. Coupled with a just culture. So what's it? I've put the word just in there. What's that mean? It basically means the standard's set and everybody knows what the standard is. And if you stray from the standard, what happens to you is the same for everybody, irrespective of where they are in the business. Okay. Again, you're striving to do where it's necessary on the safety critical tasks and equipment, you're striving to do the right thing. And all of that is headed up by mindful leadership. So what do I mean by mindful leadership? Quite simply, it's about at the forefront of their mind is that they are dealing with things in their processes that have the potential to do a lot of harm, and they don't want that harm to be realised. It's right up there on the risk register of your companies, because it's reputational loss. It could be the business falling over completely if one of these events happen. So they actively try to not win that lotto jackpot and put the effort in and make it happen. So on that, I'm going to finish now. I hope you found it interesting and at least thought-provoking. And so you can go back and think about what happens in our organisations. What do we really need to improve? Where do we not have the confidence that what we're working with will be effective? Yeah, because to prevent these major accidents, you will have equipment. There will be tasks that you do that need to be done right each and every time. Because if you don't, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. You will have, as incident history has shown, you will have a large number of barriers. And it's easy to think that the barriers won't all simultaneously fail. And it's easy to think that because they won't all simultaneously fail. It will never happen. The fact of the matter is, you've got barriers that are sitting there in a failed state. And one of them is working, but now this one doesn't work. And the rest are sitting there in a failed status because you're not putting the effort into knowing, is all of those barriers effective? It's very difficult for operators. They can sit there, I've got this, and this to protect me. And they assume they will always be working and therefore they're not going to be harmed. It's one of the reasons why such events are very low frequency. They happen extremely infrequently. But it's only because we never get ourselves in our situation that our barriers fail. So I want to leave it at that for today. Obviously, if you want any help on this, discussions with me or Sigma-HSE on any aspect of what I've been talking about, then you can contact us at the website address, send an email to info@sigmahse.com or give us a phone call and we'll try to do our best to help us. But at that, I'll end for today. I'll thank you very much for listening to me. As I say, I hope you found it enjoyable and worth sitting for the past 50 minutes or so. Have a good rest of the day, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.